Hello and a very warm welcome to this episode of CareersLab, where we focus on the question of should I do a Masters? I'm your friendly careers consultant at UCL, Raj Sidhu. I'm going to be in conversation with two academic friends and colleagues. We're going to be focusing on how the student experience differs between a bachelor's and a postgraduate degree, to good and bad reasons for doing a Masters. Now shortly this recording will switch into a static audio recording of our chat, and I'm going to list the different sections and timings on the screen like this so that you can access the parts that are most meaningful to you. Hello and a very warm welcome to this Careers Lab podcast episode focusing on helping you decide on whether or not to do a Masters. I'm your host Raj Sidhu of UCL Careers, and it gives me real pleasure to be joined today in discussion with Doctors Anna Roffey and Stephen Potts, both of UCL. How are you both?
Very well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this podcast is for you regardless of which department you are from, and I'd like to kick off with the very open question: what is a master's degree?
A master's degree will involve some independent research in a certain topic, and you'll have a supervisor for that. And if you are doing a taught master's, the level of modules you'll take will be at an advanced level that you won't cover in a standard bachelor's.
Most of the programs work by having the first term with a lot of the taught components, so there are however many credits of taught components that they will cover. And then in the second term they may also have a little bit of taught material, but they will begin to work on their research projects. It's very intense, a lot of material to cover in that first term, so they'll be working full time, like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, perhaps a little work at the weekend. And then after Christmas, again, that will be more or less 9 to 5, and they don't get Easter. They get, when the university is closed, they don't have to be around, and they get some weeks of holiday, but they don't get the term holidays that the undergraduates get.
So that's quite a big deal then, right?
Yeah, it's a big adjustment for some people to kind of get used to that, but if you think about it more, it's closer to doing a sort of, it's closer to real research. So you're doing a 9 to 5 job, and at the beginning you're doing taught components of that, and then you're doing research components of that.
What kind of constituent part of a master's degree is taken up with modules as opposed to the research project?
That really depends on the type of master's you do. If it's integrated master's, then it will probably be about 50% of the time taught. For a taught postgraduate master's, about the same, sometimes a little more taught, but for a straightforward MRes, it'd be all research.
Okay, so for the non-MRes, are there exam components to the modules, or is it coursework, or?
Can be either, yeah. Depends on the course you go for. So they can be exam based, just like the undergraduate modules that you might take, and then depending what course you're doing, what subject, they might have just coursework only. For instance, I teach on a coursework only master's.
Another question I occasionally get from bachelor students looking to do masters and thinking about their life around their master's degree is whether or not they might be able to work alongside a master's. What is your feeling around this question?
When I did my master's, I was still, just before I did my master's, I was still very much working with the Students' Union, and it's something I hoped to continue. But realistically, when the research project kicked in, that kind of becomes your full-time job. So technically it's possible to work during your master's, and I did a little bit over the holidays, but when you're actually doing your research, it's completely impractical, and I wouldn't recommend it.
I would actually agree with that for the 1 year taught masters. It's a 1 year full year. With the taught master students, they have to be there at all times. They're more like a research student or a PhD student. They don't get term times, they don't get the summer off. They have a very full timetable. They have so much they have to cover in just 1 year that to do a job on top. I know people who do it, but it does impact on their studies a bit.
It's a really good point also you make about an elongated year for a taught master's program. This is not exams in April and then you're off. It will continue till, what are we saying, September?
Ours does, yeah.
So I'm just wondering about the research element of a master's degree. How does that work?
Depending on whether you're doing the integrated or the standalone masters and what subject and how your department runs things, you'll be able to choose a supervisor or project, or you might be assigned one, depends. And then at some point during the year that you have for your master's, you will do probably about 6 months research. That's associated with a certain number of credits. So if you have a larger or shorter, or larger or less significant research project, then it will be less time or more time.
So you mentioned some of those being research areas generated by the student, some being potentially provided. What's the split like between those?
I think that's really subject dependent. But for the taught masters students, a lot of the time they'll be given a sort of general area, but they'll come to a research question with their supervisor. So it's more collaborative for them, depending. And I know, like in other subjects like English, the students are expected to come up with the research question themselves, very much themselves.
If it's an integrated master's, that generally you tend to be assigned, it's very much run as a departmental giant module, and you are assigned because that's much easier. But for postgraduate, you take the reins a bit more and you take control a bit more, and you can decide. But yeah, as you said, it's very subject specific, department specific.
Many subjects don't offer a master's that's integrated.
Oh yeah.
And also many subjects or many masters are required as like an accreditation for you to be able to do the profession. So people might retrain and come back and just do this one master's like many years after completing their bachelor's.
I imagine there might be a few. It's certainly the case for me. I had to do a postgraduate.
Yeah.
I had to do a postgraduate. Sounds horrific. To achieve accreditation as a careers coach.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly true in more vocational aspects like translation, where it's very difficult to get a translation role unless you've got a postgraduate qualification, similar to library services as well.
There's a lot of medical areas that you can go into that require it for accreditation, and pharmacy and things like that, because it's a professional sort of vocational subject.
I suppose you could argue it's the same for PhD, though. You need a master's to do that more often than not.
The master's as a gateway drug.
Yes. Although it's not necessary. I mean,
I know, actually, I said that I know 2 chemists that have gone on to do a PhD without a master's.
Oh, okay.
But
it's rare.
It's rare, very rare, but they truly were exceptional.
And also they won't have had probably any experience by the end of the bachelor's of any sort of research. So they don't know for sure if they like it, and then they sort of commit to 4 years or 3 years of PhD. But
they did do plenty of internships as well. So they did have that experience.
Right.
I think that's probably a good point to hit on, actually, that the master's gives you the research experience and allows you to decide whether you like it or not.
Yeah. I guess for a supervisor it's very risky to take a chance on someone who hasn't had that exposure.
Yes, I would say. Yeah.
So there are loads of different kinds of masters, and just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of an MSc, MSci, MA, MEng, MPhil, MBA, MRes. There seems to be an enormous diversity around this master's level of qualification. What's the deal here?
In some cases, they're just the same thing with different branding. It's like PhD versus DPhil. It's pretty much the same thing under the same banner. With MSc versus MRes, MSc typically encompasses the taught masters, whereas MRes, that res just specifies that it's just research. So that will be a research-only master's. So it could just be branding. It could tell you something else.
What do you think the labour market makes of distinction? Something they're aware of, or something they just see and absorb without thinking about?
I think that's maybe somewhat person-dependent, depending on, like, if it's a recruiter, it'll be what they know of their own experience, probably, in many cases. But I think after the fact that you've got a master's, I think that's the real key. These labels are, people understand that they can come in many different forms, but as long as you've got a master's and you did okay, and that's the main thing.
Does it give scope for greater specialisation?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we have a sort of range of different areas that you can do. It can be a way to specialise, for sure.
Well, from my experience, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a PhD, and I wasn't sure what research was. But in some ways, doing the master's research made me grow up a little bit in terms of directing research, take more pride in it, because you have to present this work at the end of your master's to loads of people. You make sure you do the best job you can, and then I think it really matures you.
You have to present it at the end of the year?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So, well, you'll have to, in various forms. So ultimately, it's still a degree, so you have to be examined in it.
Was the growing up aspect that you just mentioned, was that an expected or an unexpected component of your experience with your Masters, Stephen?
That's a really difficult one. I wasn't thinking about that at the time, but I suppose it was expected because people are putting more trust in you to do the work properly.
In what ways does the student experience differ between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree? Now, we've mentioned a few things already. There's a difference in years, there's a difference potentially in intensity levels. How else might a master's feel different?
The students get more contact time with academics. I think the student experience is more sort of integrated into the department and they feel more part of the departmental community, I think.
Deeper relationships?
Yes.
There is more often than not somebody that will be assigned to mentor you, that you can talk to, whether that's a PhD student or a postdoc, who will help guide you. So you're not completely in at the deep end. But in terms of coping, just try to plan your days out in advance, plan what you're going to do. When you start, get a literature review going so that you don't reinvent the wheel. The other thing is, I would say, be prepared for things not to work, because that's research. So try not to worry too much about it. And if in doubt, ask your supervisor if you're struggling.
I would agree. And the only thing I would add is to say always take notes when you're having meetings with your supervisor, because they will invariably remember everything they told you and then ask you about it 4 weeks later and you've forgotten everything they said.
So the next question I'd like us to focus on is what a master's can do for you that a bachelor's can't.
I think it can open doors in your career. So if you're looking to do a graduate scheme, they may require a master's level degree, they may not, but it will close some of the doors if you haven't got the master's. And that's up to you, entirely. Like, it might just be fine. It depends what you want to go on and do. Could allow you to specialise a little bit, and by doing the master's it gives you an opportunity to try research, which you might not get otherwise, before making a sort of decision about your career, about what you want to do exactly.
I think I've seen people use a master's as a way as slightly pivoting towards a certain specialism. For example, a bachelor in engineering followed by a master's in climate science and engineering, for example. It's a nice, clean way of getting a direction.
Absolutely.
What things are worth considering when weighing up whether or not to do a master's?
Well, finances are something that you should definitely think about.
Mm-hmm.
Depending if you're doing the integrated 4-year master's, that then I believe the 4th year is funded in the same way as the rest of your undergraduate, so your student loan will just continue. If you do the separate postgraduate masters, then there is funding available, but it may not cover all of your student fees and it may not contribute enough to allow you living expenses on top. So something you need to think about is how you're going to fund it and what your finances are. Especially if you don't qualify for that, if you're not a UK national or whatever comes under the scheme. So that will be my first thought.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would also think about where I wanted to do it. So you can stay at your own institution, you don't have to integrate too much, you already know how everything works, you know who the people are, the staff, so you can just go and specialise in a certain area. Or you can choose to sort of open a bit more, go to a different university. Could be in this country, could be in another country. Other countries also have different student fees. For instance, in Sweden, it's free to study for a master's, and all their masters are taught in English. So I know other people who have been to study there. So yeah, perhaps what you think you might want to go on to do in the future, if you decided you've become very interested in one specific area, doing a master's in that area is a good idea. It will help you to move forward in your career, but it might not be vital. So if you want to go straight into that career, maybe you should check first, because you might not need it.
And there's always the option of coming back to do a master's later on.
Absolutely.
Just to add to what Anna's said as well, so looking at masters abroad and the fees differences as well, but also think about the time you're willing to spend on it, because some of them are 2 years long depending on where you go. Are you prepared to spend that amount of time on it?
Anything else worth considering when weighing up whether or not to do a master's?
I know a lot of people choose to do a master's at UCL because they want to study in London.
Yeah.
And they want that experience. And it's a 1-year course, so it's not a massive time commitment, and maybe they know they need a master's, or they just don't know what they want to do, so they are happy to continue in education and do something fun for a year in London. And those aren't bad reasons, but there is a financial cost, so they should definitely weigh up why they're doing it and if it is worth it for their career goals. If they don't know what their career goals are, it's not a bad thing to become more qualified if they can afford to do so.
And it is a significant cost for a master's degree. Let's be clear about that.
Yes, it is. Especially if you're a non-UK or EU national. It can be very expensive.
Yeah. That leads us very neatly onto good reasons for doing a master's. I think off the top of my head from the conversation thus far, I'm certainly getting a sense that a good reason for doing a master's is to develop a relationship with research, to understand if it's for you. What else might be a good reason for doing a master's?
Wanting to specialise is definitely a good reason. If you have an idea in your mind and you have a career goal, or even if you just are very interested in one subject and you want to continue with that subject, masters in that area is a really good idea.
If you want to do a PhD, a master's is a must.
And I'm going to throw in a master's can be vital to enter into certain professions as well, so it's obviously a very good reason to do it.
Well, just following on from that, graduate schemes, certain graduate schemes do require master's level. That's one of their requirements for entry, so that can be.
What bad reasons for doing a master's?
One thing that I brought up in a PhD discussion, I think applies to masters as well. If it's not part of your integrated degree and you're just using it as a stopgap, that's not a good reason to do a master's, especially as this time you're paying for it or someone's paying for it and you're not getting money in. So that's a really bad reason to do one.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not funded in some way and you don't have a lot of disposable income, it's not a good idea to just continue on and do the masters unless you have a good reason. Like, unless there's some goal that you're reaching. Just going with the flow and not making decisions and just kind of continuing isn't always the best option.
Kicking the can down the road for another year or so.
Exactly.
Normally I go along to these big induction events and I normally sit amongst the crowd and just kind of soak it up and listen to what people are saying around me. And the thing that comes up time and time again is people expressing a degree of happiness at starting a master's so that they don't have to think about their careers for another year.
I would think that if you've chosen to do a master's, you already have a career in mind. Even in my case, I mean, I did an integrated master's, so when I joined up, it's because I liked chemistry, so I wanted to do that extra year and I wanted to find out what research was, but I still wasn't sure what my career option was, but I didn't want to completely rule out research, so that's why I did it. But again, if you're just diving into it for no reason, just you've got to be thinking of your career during it, because there are so many opportunities to do career related things, go to seminars about it, build your CV up and things like that, so don't waste that opportunity.
Having said that, I know that many students do indeed start doing a master's because they're not quite sure what they want to do and they are reasonably happy with being at university, and it seems like a good idea to continue doing what works for them. So perhaps doing the master's does buy them some time. They often, by the end of the year, anecdotally, my own students have, by the end of the year, applied for PhDs, applied for graduate schemes. I'm writing references left, right and centre, so it does seem to help them to get to that point.
So a sense of clarity does typically emerge over the course of a year?
Can do, yeah.
Okay. Are there any other bad reasons for doing a master's?
Probably there are. Like my girlfriend's doing one, that might be a bad reason.
My parents expect me to, that's another reason. Your heart's got to be in it. That's the same for anything, I would say.
Is it harder to sustain interest in a master's if you're not fundamentally motivated than compared with a bachelor's?
I'd say it was because it's so different to the bachelor's, that in itself is quite interesting. You do have a certain amount of time where you have to do a research project, or you get to do a research project. But during that there will be highs and lows, and you need to be able to motivate yourself to continue, as you might do if you continued in research and did a PhD.
Yeah.
But it's a reasonably short amount of time, so I think the variety sort of adds its own interest by doing the masters.
But that said, if you weren't doing it for the right reasons and you weren't personally motivated, if you got to that first hurdle of research not working, you might just give up on it and quit.
It might be a harder year for you if you struggle to motivate yourself through those hard times during your research project.
Another question that's just occurred to me, what is the nature of the relationship between the student and their supervisor over the course of that research period? How often are they checking in? Is there designated one-to-one time? How does that work?
It really depends, again, on the research supervisor. It might be once a week, it might be once every couple of weeks, certainly once a month, I would hope at a minimum. From my personal experience, you get to know them quite well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. You would hope it would be roughly on a weekly basis, just because you don't have so long to do your research project, so you need to make sure it stays on track.
Yeah.
But and I think most supervisors prefer to have that sort of closer contact because of the same reasons.
Yeah, they can keep an eye on things.
Yes, exactly.
Any last thoughts to add on the topic of should I do a master's?
It's really fun. We put on social events and we do quite a lot of helping students to integrate into the department and into UCL life.
What does that look like?
So we have a welcome party at the beginning of term, close to Halloween. Sometimes it's themed with Halloween stuff. And we have, so I'm a program director, so I did a special Christmas lunch with my students, my cohort in my program. So it potluck, so everyone brought a dish from that they would normally eat around Christmas time, which was great because we have quite a diverse student body. So out of 15 students, I think we almost had 10 different countries represented. It was really good. And then we had a big Christmas meal for the entire program, all of the postgraduate master's students. And we'll do something for Chinese New Year. Hopefully we'll do some more events throughout the year.
What kind of dishes did they bring to the potluck, Anna?
Oh, it was great. We had a Greek dish, which was a bit like moussaka on the top, but pasta underneath. We had, it was really tasty. And she put stuff on top that was really, really good. We had some Portuguese sort of donut balls that were apparently very common to have at Christmas with cinnamon on top and sugar. It was really good. A Chinese student, he made this really great chili chicken dish, but it was so spicy. Everyone was like having a small amount and then steam is coming out their ears. It was really good. I brought mince pies, which is a bit lame, but I also brought crackers, which went down very well.
How would you describe the experience for a student coming in to do a master's at UCL who is not from UK or Europe?
I think at the very beginning, it's always a little disorienting because no matter how much information we provide and information sessions we have, it's a lot to take in at the beginning of the year. So it's quite a lot of information, which can be slightly overwhelming just at the very beginning. And then the first term, I think many students will settle in before Christmas. So they may find that their language skills are a little rusty, and we often have students feeling quite concerned about that at the very beginning of term. But by about Christmas, they've done enough work and lectures and coursework and speaking to other students and kind of being submerged in the language that they feel a lot happier. And then for the second part of after Christmas, the second term, they start to get into their research projects, and then it sort of shifts and they become part of a research group. So their friendship group goes from maybe being mainly their cohort of students to being their research group, which I think is quite nice because it broadens out the number of people they can have friendships with.
One question that I occasionally get asked, especially over the summer term, is for those master's offer holders who are asking about optimal preparation, so before they've started their master's programme. What words of advice would you have for those individuals?
Well, if you know the subject you're going into, it really can't hurt to try to read up on the background of that. And if you have access to journal articles to read up on some key papers, it's likely that your potential supervisor will forward stuff on. And if they haven't, do ask them. I think they'd be only too happy to let you have a head start on that. Of course, if you're going to have to move somewhere else, you'll need to prepare everything for that and understand about the new city, the new place, especially if you're going abroad, understand the way they work and do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you are feeling a bit worried about your language skills, then maybe take some time and do some practice with, if you can find an English friend, or if you just do some online practice or reading some books. Anything might, just make you feel a bit more comfortable about the transition. Getting in contact with any people you might know in London, you might have contacts through friends or family. It's always good to just have a little set up your network before you arrive, so in case you want to speak to anyone.
Yeah, really good idea. And you can always check out the university student societies as well to get a sense of what you might like to join, so that again you have a sense of community there and ready for when you do arrive.
Absolutely.
And also check out the support services the university offers, such as counselling, or if you have something that might allow you to have reasonable adjustments, try to look up in advance.
Absolutely,
as well.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
Do a master's, it's great.
I'd like to extend my thanks to Dr. Anna Roffey and Stephen Potts for participating in this conversation. If it's a conversation you'd like to continue with me, then feel free to comment in the section down below. For any other careers questions, I love receiving those. Please send them to careers.marketing@ucl.ac.uk. That's it from me for this week. I'll see you next time.